Okay. Now what we want to get into, so now we've talked about the revenue side that states collect money from. We've talked in general about the expense side, what they're required to spend. Now we're going to get into the process. How does this process work? Okay. And what you see here is kind of a generic budget process. And what you'll see here is that in August and September, there is budget planning. And that budget planning is by the departments, and they are looking at their budgets for the next fiscal year. Okay? For the next fiscal year. And they are submitting those planning documents to the governmental agency, the state, and they are looking at prioritizing their list, whatever those expectations are from the state in order to prepare for the budget process. Okay? Then we get into January and February, and most states, the governor will make a recommendation to the legislature with regard to the budget. You can also back up here and say that there's a lot of work that will be done. How much money will we be collecting? What are our projections? What are the expenses? So a lot of those kinds of things take place. And you'll recall, I think a couple weeks ago, you saw a video, and the Arizona governor was preparing for the upcoming state budget. And she was talking about that it was going to be lean times, and some of the proposals that there was coming forward. In the meantime, typically the governor will have perhaps their personal initiatives that they are going to sponsor. Maybe they ran on a campaign that they're going to provide additional reading. Reading is fundamental. So they are going to, in their budget, they're going to have a line item for that program. Okay? And all of the departments that are to be funded are going to be having different budget proposals coming from the governor or the governor's office. Okay? And we are about to hear tomorrow will be the launching of that conversation. Kasich is going to be unveiling here in Ohio the budget proposal, his budget proposal for the next fiscal year, okay? Which will be fiscal year 2014, okay? And actually, in Ohio, we do a 2-year budget. It's called a biennial budget. So it's for a 2-year period of time. Okay, in February through June, there is haggling by legislators. And they are going to be meeting in committees. They're going to be talking about some things they want to see in the budget. And there's going to be this discussion back and forth as to what the budget is going to actually look like, okay? And because schools are, and state government is on a July 1st through June 30th cycle, this must be determined, it must be finalized by June 30th. If not, the government can't pay any bills. And we've been through that a time or two, and sometimes they'll pass a temporary measure to get us through. And our federal government has been through this a number of times, and you might have heard on occasion about that. After it is passed, the budget is passed. What's a budget? Tell me what a budget is.
Plan.
A plan, okay? And that plan includes what?
Finances.
Okay, give me a little bit more detail.
Coming in and out of the
Yes,
district.
the amount of money that's coming in and the amount of money that we're spending. That's the budget, okay? Budget proposal. And then it's passed. After it is passed, it then must go into an appropriation. An appropriation. One of the things I want you to hear is that we can't spend money out of a budget. We have to have an appropriation measure. And with an appropriation measure, you're going to see one here in a minute, there are various lines in the appropriations, okay? Different appropriation lines, okay? So the budget is transferred into an appropriation measure, and
Real quick, appropriations is all spending though, right?
yes,
Okay.
as soon as you have an appropriation passed, you then can spend the money out of the accounts. Yep, and you see that in schools, and schools even have a few things they can do with temporary appropriation measures until they get all the details in as far as the revenue is concerned, okay? And so ultimately, there is an appropriation measure that is enacted, and we now can spend the state money. And what's going to happen for schools is when that happens, a certain amount of money is going to go to the Department of Education, and the Department of Education is then going to be dispersing, based on the state formula, the monies to the schools. This is an example of an appropriation measure. And what you see here, this is a state appropriation measure, and you'll see here, State Department of Education getting $2,175,900,000 blah, 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 dollars. That is the final appropriation, okay? And this was what was appropriated from fiscal year 6, and this was what was appropriated in fiscal year 7, okay? This is a line item. Education, Educational Television Authority, higher education, libraries. Those are all line items. Now, in schools, line items, we have Title I wages, salaries and wages. We have Title I benefits. We have regular teachers' salaries. We have regular teachers' benefits. So those are the line items, okay? Here you'll see that they also included the dollar, the amount of the dollar change from year to year and percent change. And what you'll see here is, I would consider this to be an incremental budget. And when we get into budgeting, we'll talk to you more about how budgeting takes place. But with an incremental budget, each year you get a little bit more money. And we're accustomed to that. We're accustomed to that in our personal lives. We're accustomed to that at the state level. We're accustomed to that in schools and even programs that we manage. We see a little bit of increase from year to year, except for 2009 when all of a sudden, boom, those percentages could be there.
I have a quick question on that. With
Yep.
the private vocational schools thing,
Yes.
what happened to that? It just went from a small amount to nothing. So did it just
no.
like,
Yeah, I pulled this one off the internet,
Okay.
and it's very generic,
Okay.
and so I don't know. I'm guessing, I'm just guessing, that these are private vocational schools, okay? Where they went from receiving some money to receiving no money. Now, of course, private schools, like Franciscan, we don't receive, I should have probably told you that, higher education was all public schools. No private schools receive money from the state to operate.
They got a grant or something, does that show up in that, or is that, no?
It could, in this generic, I'd say no, but for a school, yes, there's going to be, the way that's going to work is, let's say that during the school year, Of course, the fiscal year started July 1st, but we didn't get this grant until September. And let's say we got $50,000, we applied for a grant, yippee, we got it, we're happy. And what's going to happen is the treasurer, Stacy, you hear that? The treasurer is going to create a line item in the appropriations measure for that grant. And depending upon how that grant can be spent, whether it be wages, whether it be supplies, whether it be equipment, depending on how that grant is written, they're going to, or how the budget, there's usually a budget page that goes with those grants, how that budget page is written is then going to be transferred over to the appropriations measure. When those monies come in, then they're going to be allocated to those particular, to those line items, okay? A couple other terms here, and that is encumbrance and unencumbered. And if this was a line item, and we will say that we had over here, we had wages, and we're a pretty good sized school, and with that school, in a month's time, we paid $500,000 was appropriated for wages, okay? And encumbrance. Now, what an encumbrance means is we know that we've got to make that pay to the, we're going to make it simple, it's going to be a one-time monthly pay, and the 15th of the month, we're going to pay the teachers. And so it's encumbered, meaning that we know we've got to spend that amount, okay? And we had no other expenditures, and our available balance, or unencumbered, unspent. Unencumbered means unspent. Unspent is $300,000. Go ahead, Andy.
Is appropriations exact? It's not exact, is it?
No,
It's
no.
close to accurate, right?
As accurate as can be, and schools have the opportunity to adjust. So let's just say that I always like to use technology as my example. Let's just say that we put $500,000 in computer repair. Now I know that's a ridiculous figure. We're going to buy new computers before we're going to spend $500,000 to repair them. But for my example, let's just say that we have appropriated, the line item is for computer repair. And we have $500,000 in it. Lo and behold, we have a host of them blow up. And so we put a purchase order out there and we encumber $200,000, okay? When that's spent, it goes over here into this column, expenditures. We expended. This means that there's a purchase order, we've not paid it yet, okay? Expenditures, this figure moves over to here, and we have this amount left. Let's say the next 3 months, we have these are really bad computers. 350, we won't use any particular company names. Anyway, all of a sudden we had a $350,000 expense. Well, we only got $300,000, so we're short. What we are allowed to do, what treasurers and superintendents and principals can make recommendations. Boards of education decide whether we will do it or not. They might look at all the other line items and say, we have not used $400,000 in new computers. So we're going to transfer that $400,000 into this line item, which means that we now have a $350,000 encumbrance. We have $350,000 remaining. And so yes, we may make transfers.
Last thing I require.
Yep. No, you can.
So that's why you would overestimate not a ton, but always overestimate.
It
Because you
is,
may be under over here, but you
Yes.
went over there.
yes, it is,
and
it's
balance
always a
out.
good idea, if you can, to budget high, spend low. Appropriate high, spend low. That's a good rule of thumb. Can't always do it, because you have unexpected expenditures. And most generally, every month, there's going to be the need to transfer money from one line item to another line item. And treasurers will present that information to boards of education, and boards of education will hopefully approve it. If not, then there's a real problem, especially if it's needed. Okay? In the meantime, of course, you can't spend the money until you have a purchase order. Okay? Questions? When we come back, we'll get into your particular state.